The following video deals with mature subject matter which may not be suitable for younger children. Your discretion is advised.
In one of the chapters of his 2019 book, Mysteries of Canada Volume 1, this author touched on the bizarre phenomenon of universal folk tales, strange stories shared by different and unrelated cultures across the globe. Nearly every culture on Earth, for example, has its ghost stories. Tales of apparitions, disembodied voices, cold spots, rancid odors, and autokinesis, which are invariably attributed to the souls of the dead, trapped between this world and the next. Hunter-gatherer tribes in all 6 of the northern continents told tales of hairy, stinking, whistling, stone-throwing wild men who stole their food in the night and abducted any lone women or children who strayed too far from camp. Stories of colossal predatory birds associated with thunder and lightning are similarly ubiquitous. All across North America, these giant raptors, commonly referred to as thunderbirds, were said to be the mortal enemies of an equally mysterious horned water serpent. Traditional folklore all over the world cautions against whistling at night, contending that nocturnal music invites the unwanted attentions of evil spirits. And nearly every culture on Earth, at one time or another, believed in a race of little elusive people who lived in the wilderness and on the edge of civilization, concealed behind some preternatural veil from which they rarely emerged. For at least 2 centuries, rationalist intellectuals, psychological anthropologists, and professional skeptics have attempted to provide rational explanations for the pervasiveness of intercultural folktales such as these, usually proposing that they are symptoms of some universal human condition. Some anthropologists, for example, have suggested that the wild man legend denotes a deep-seated cultural recollection of ancient intertribal warfare, or serve to enforce important cultural norms. Some have attributed the universal dragon myth to the discovery of dinosaur fossils, and other monster stories have been dismissed as products of pareidolia, that's the human tendency to anthropomorphize inhuman objects, and glimpses of more prosaic animals obscured by darkness or underbrush. Throughout the course of his research, this author has become aware of a very peculiar type of universal folktale, which is far more difficult for skeptics to dismiss as the progeny of some inherent human quality. More specifically, this author has observed that there are certain mysterious phenomena which feature in folkloric traditions all over the world, behind which different cultures ascribe different causal agents. In other words, certain cultures across the globe, with no discernible connections with each other, describe the same strange occurrences in their traditional stories, but believe that different mechanisms or entities are responsible for them. In this series, we will examine 4 different types of strange phenomena, and the explanations which various traditions assign to them. Each phenomenon we will examine is actually composed of multiple sub-phenomena, and so to avoid confusion, we will refer to the larger compound phenomena which feature in disparate folkloric traditions as eventi, a Latin word meaning occurrence, while we will refer to their respective constituents as sub-phenomena. The spookiest link between intercultural beliefs that this author has come across are the characteristics which Roman Catholic exorcists claim manifest in the demonically possessed, and qualities which Canada's Cree and Algonquin First Nations historically attributed to victims of Wendigo possession. In order to understand this eerie parallel, we must first come to a basic understanding of the Roman Catholic conception of demons and demonic possession, and the Cree Algonquin reception of the Wendigo. According to Roman Catholic doctrine, prior to the dawn of time, God created a legion of angels to serve him in heaven. Drawing from scripture and sacred tradition, the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that angels are immortal, purely spiritual entities, endowed with intelligence and free will. Prior to the creation of the world, the most brilliant of the angels, referred to today as Lucifer, rejected God and his supremacy out of pride and envy. A heavenly battle erupted between the fallen angels, who aligned themselves with Lucifer, and the heavenly host loyal to God, captained by Saint Michael the Archangel. The rebellious angels were ultimately defeated and ejected from paradise by the heavenly host. Lucifer, in his fallen state, is referred to as Satan, or the devil, while his minions are called demons. Catholic tradition contends that the devil and his demons are consumed by an eternal hatred of God and his creation. As such, their relationship with mankind, man being more precious in the eyes of God than all other creatures, as early church father St. John Chrysostom asserted in a 4th century sermon, is defined by two motivations: to tempt people into sinning against God, and to cause human suffering, from which they derive a sort of hateful pleasure. Many of those who have written on the subject have suggested that the devil's primary goal of luring humans into temptation is most effectively facilitated by a lack of belief in his existence. This concept was perhaps most famously articulated by Kevin Spacey's character, Verbal Kint, in the 1995 film The Usual Suspects. During a monologue on a semi-mythical crime lord called Kaiser Sose, Kint said, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist." This iconic movie line echoes the words of 20th century American Catholic theologian Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who wrote in his 1944 book Love One Another, "The demonic is always most powerful when he is denied." 2 years prior to the publication of Sheen's book, British writer C.S. Lewis inserted the same idea into his epistolary novel The Screwtape Letters, which pretends to be a series of correspondence between a senior demon called Screwtape and his diabolical apprentice, Wormwood. In addition to prowling about the world seeking the ruin of souls, as Pope Leo XIII put it in his chilling 1886 prayer to St. Michael the Archangel, Catholic doctrine teaches that Satan and his demons, when given the opportunity, sometimes seize control of human bodies, pushing the resident souls aside and using the corpora they commandeer to speak and move, a phenomenon referenced repeatedly throughout the Gospels. Catholic exorcists, priests trained by the Vatican to cast out demons, contend that people make themselves vulnerable to demonic possession by participating in occult or necromantic rituals, practicing witchcraft, and living in a state of unrepentant mortal sin. People possessed by demons are said to often display startling and distressing manifestations of their condition, some of which we will explore shortly. Signs of demonic possession are often so conspicuous and frightening that friends and family members of the victim are compelled to seek the assistance of a priest. In acknowledging the existence of the evil spirit inhabiting the body of their loved one, these concerned acquaintances negate the most effective weapon by which the devil and his demons lead man into sin, namely disbelief in the diabolical. Since demonic possession does not have any effect on the actual soul of the victim, one might justifiably wonder why demons bother possessing people at all, with the end result often being so injurious to their designs. Exorcist Father Jose Antonio Fortea answers this question in his 2006 book, Interview with an Exorcist, an insider's look at the devil, demonic possession, and the path to deliverance, writing, "While it would undoubtedly be more convenient for a demon not to possess someone, he does this for one simple reason: to cause suffering. Remember, demons seek to make people suffer, and with possession they can accomplish this in a very direct way. Over the long term, a particular possession may ultimately thwart the plans of the devil by bringing about a deeper devotion to God in the possessed. But in the here and now, it causes the person to suffer, and a demon cannot resist causing certain suffering in the present." What was said in a previous answer regarding why the devil could not resist tempting Jesus is equally valid here. To resist temptation...
Why the devil could not resist tempting some of the real prophets, or that part could be actually a made-up story, because that is in the New Testament, and we do know that the New Testament is bullshit, 90% of it.
In the second chapter of his 2019 book...
Remember, the devil plays both sides. He tends to be a good guy and a bad guy.
The Devil in the City of Angels, My Encounters with the Diabolical, Roman Catholic evangelist and retired veteran of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Jesse Romero, describes 9 of his own
The devil and his buddies.
personal experiences with individuals whom he suspected to be demonically possessed. Drawing from his own experiences, and his consultation with Roman Catholic exorcists, Romero developed a list of characteristics typically displayed by the demonically possessed, namely, a sudden capacity to speak unknown languages, abnormal physical strength, the ability to disclose hidden occurrences or events, and a vehement reversion to God, the litany to the Virgin Mary, the litany of the saints, and religious images, especially the cross. Bizarrely, 3 of the 4 signs of demonic possession referred to in Romero's book, namely the ability to speak foreign languages of which the subject has no knowledge, abnormal physical strength, and occult knowledge, are characteristics which the Cree and Algonquin First Nations of Canada historically ascribed to those whom they believed to be possessed by a malevolent entity they called the Wendigo. The Wendigo, or Weedigo, according to certain native traditions, is an evil spirit which roams throughout the northern wilderness in search of human hosts. People who engage in cannibalism in the cold winter months, when game is scarce, make themselves especially vulnerable to Wendigo possession. Those who become possessed by the Wendigo spirit develop an insatiable craving for human flesh, which will eventually compel them to slaughter and eat their friends and relatives, even when other food sources are abundant. Tales of suspected Wendigo possession in the wilds of 17th, 18th, and 19th century Canada are sufficiently numerous to fill a book, and in fact have been compiled into at least 2 of which this author is familiar. Disturbingly, a significant portion of the afflicted who feature in these historic Wendigo accounts are said to be endowed with the same 3 characteristics which Jesse Romero ascribes to the demonically possessed. In 4 of the 9 cases Romero describes in his book, the subject spoke gibberish, made inhuman noises, or conversed with some invisible interlocutor in a language which Romero, who is fluent in both English and Spanish, did not understand. Among the most disturbing of these incidents occurred when Romero and a fellow law enforcement officer were working night shift in Cudahy, a Latino city in southeastern LA County with a high population of ex-convicts. That night, Romero and his partner, service pistols drawn, entered a house in which a neighbor reported hearing a single gunshot. Inside, they found a middle-aged woman with a shotgun in her lap, sitting next to the body of her husband, whose head she had just blown off. The woman told the officers that an invisible entity in the corner of the room had told her to commit the deed. "Don't you see him?" she asked, pointing to the corner of the room. "He's laughing, he's laughing." The murderess proceeded to converse with the invisible figure, in a language which Romero did not recognize, and continued this eerie discourse throughout the subsequent drive to the sheriff's station, acting as if the figure was sitting in the back seat of the patrol car with her. In many Wendigo stories, victims are said to have similarly babbled unintelligibly, in a language which none of their friends or family members could understand, much like the murderess in Jesse Romero's story. For example, in an article published in the June 1946 issue of a magazine called The Alberta Folklore Quarterly, an ex-Hudson's Bay Company or HBC inspector named Philip H. Godsell described an incident which took place at a remote HBC post at what is now the hamlet of Wabasca, Alberta, northeast of Lesser Slave Lake. One day, the fort's factor, Frank Beaton, was visited by a frightened band of woodland Cree, who informed him that one of their number was possessed by the Wendigo, as evidenced by the strange words that poured from his lips. It must be mentioned that Godsell, who heard the tale from Beaton, suspected that the unfortunate native had actually been suffering from a bad case of influenza, and had muttered nonsense in his delirium. Another fur trader named George Nelson, who conducted business with the Cree and Ojibwe of what is now Wisconsin, northern Manitoba, and northern Saskatchewan, respectively, in the early 1800s, saw many Indians who were said to be under the influence of the Wendigo. He described their appearance and behavior in several letters to his father, writing that they would sometimes erupt into violent convulsions, uttering wild, incoherent, and extravagant language.
The thing is, this monkey right here can do it almost better than me.
In 3 of the 9 personal anecdotes in Romero's book, the suspected demoniac, as victims of possession are sometimes called, displayed extraordinary physical strength, inconsistent with his or her size. The most remarkable of these cases, in this author's opinion, involved a short, petite Mexican woman in her early 30s, whom Romero refers to as Lola, whose father had forced her to participate in satanic rituals throughout her childhood. At the invitation of Lola's parish priest, Romero and his wife participated in an informal exorcism, which Romero called a healing and deliverance session, which was intended to free Lola of the demons she claimed were tormenting her. They were joined by the priest, Lola's mother, and 3 of Lola's brothers. During the session, the priest presented Lola with the Holy Eucharist, a consecrated disc of sacramental bread, which Catholics believe embodies Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Immediately, the woman displayed demonic manifestations.
She believed in the devil's son, Mr. J, Mr. Z's son, and she got demonically possessed.
In addition to speaking in tongues, she flew into an implacable rage. Effortlessly throwing off her 3 brothers, who had been struggling to restrain her, she balled up her fist and cracked the priest on the jaw, sending him sliding on his backside across the floor. Shortly thereafter, she grabbed Jesse Romero by the lapels and threw him violently against a wall, launching him clean off his feet. Before the session began, Romero wrote, the priest had prayed a prayer of protection for all of us and told us, God will protect you tonight. Nobody will be hurt. The only thing that was hurt was my ego, that a petite, short woman, weighing about 120 pounds, could toss me, an over 200-pound former kickboxing champion, like a ball. Jesse Romero's assertion that extreme physical strength is one of the characteristics of the demonically possessed is echoed by an alarming facet of Wendigo lore. In the vast majority of Wendigo stories, the subject's fellow band members express their concern that the afflicted will soon complete his transformation into a Wendigo, rendering him extremely dangerous and almost impossible to kill. In most Wendigo stories, the Wendigo-to-be is executed by the band members, sometimes at his or her insistence, before the metamorphosis is complete. In rare cases, however, the afflicted person appears to have acquired the alarming characteristic of nigh invulnerability prior to his or her execution. In another of George Nelson's stories, for example, a woman possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo attempted to eat an Indian child in the night, prompting the child's father to spring from his furs and bury a tomahawk in her brains. Nelson implies that, despite receiving this seemingly mortal blow, the woman proceeded to attack the father, and would have succeeded in killing him were it not for the intercession of his friends, who overwhelmed the woman and put an end to her existence. In another of Nelson's stories, a Cree man believed to be transforming into a Wendigo was ambushed while walking on a trail through the forest. His own brother, at his own insistence, shot him through the chest with his musket. The man dropped to his knees, but soon rose again, and, laughing, continued up the trail. Other members of the band subsequently hacked the man to death with tomahawks and ice picks, and burned his corpse on a pyre. The Indians who witnessed this grim cremation claimed that the man's heart remained unconsumed by fire long after the rest of his body had been reduced to ashes. In only one of the cases in Romero's book, namely that of the aforementioned Mexican woman named Lola, did the subject exhibit knowledge of secret information to which she had not been made privy, the third unusual characteristic which he claims manifests in demoniacs. During the healing and deliverance session above described, Lola pointed to one of her brothers and accused him of some embarrassing sin which he had neglected to confess to a priest. The brother was so humiliated, Romero wrote, that he just stood there petrified and did not help in prayer or in holding her down. The victim's knowledge of secret information he or she had no way of knowing is a third uncanny commonality between the Catholic conception of demonic possession and the Cree Algonquin Wendigo tradition. One of the best examples of this characteristic manifesting in a Wendigo victim is a case which took place during the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. a clash between Métis and Cree warriors of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and the Canadian government. During an event known as the Massacre at Frog Lake, several settlers were imprisoned by members of a Plains Cree war party and dragged along their campaign trail through the forests of northern Saskatchewan. One day, an old Cree woman who accompanied the warriors on their crusade began to exhibit signs of Wendigo possession, and it was unanimously agreed that she must be killed before she became too dangerous. 4 of the settlers who witnessed the woman's subsequent execution described the event in their memoirs. Only one of them, however, a widow named Teresa Gowanlock, included a particular detail which links the Wendigo phenomenon with the accounts of Catholic exorcists. In a handwritten manuscript, which was published posthumously in an October 1955 issue of the Montreal-based magazine Family Herald and Weekly Star, Gowanlock described how the old woman, prior to her execution, prophesied that terrible things would shortly happen to the Cree warriors as punishment for the atrocities they committed at Frog Lake. Several days later, the Cree had their final skirmish with government forces at the edge of the boreal forest, exchanging gunfire in an event known today as the Battle of Loon Lake. The Cree were defeated in this firefight, and their campaign ended shortly thereafter. Many of the warriors who committed atrocities at Frog Lake were subsequently hunted down and captured by officers of the Northwest Mounted Police. On November 27, 1885, 6 of the captives, along with 2 other murderers from a different band, were executed at Fort Battleford, Saskatchewan, in what was to be the largest mass hanging in Canadian history, apparently fulfilling the predictions of the Wendigo woman. In the next video in this series, we'll take a look at the subphenomenon of mysterious braids appearing in the fibers of horses, cattle, and automobiles, and the various explanations which different folkloric traditions assign to them. Can you think of another type of subphenomenon which recurs in different folktales across the globe? Please let me know in the comments below.